Hello, everybody. Hope you are having a great week/weekend whenever you are watching this. Today, we are going to be walking through the argumentative FRQ that was assigned for week 4 of remote learning, and this was a practice argumentative FRQ talking about the expanded powers of the national government and whether that benefits or hinders policymaking. So the first thing I'm going to have us do is just kind of like the last FRQ video. I'm going to read through the prompt. I want to really break down the rubric for you guys so that way you know exactly how you are going to be assessed on the AP test on May 11th. And then we are going to go through some sample answers. So just like last week, you will have a chance to make revisions on your FRQ. So I will go through that process, what that should look like once we walk through the actual FRQ. So what I would do is while you are watching this video, I would make sure that in another tab you have open the assignment that you turned into Google Classroom. And that should be the assignment for Friday, which was the I believe it was the 24th. Yes, the 24th. Okay, so you should probably have that up just so that you can compare side by side, what you had written and then this kind of walkthrough. Okay, so the prompt this week definitely reminded you to time yourself because, as you know, you only have 25 minutes on test day. And I know right now 25 minutes feels like a lot of time, but when we break down exactly what you have to do, you're going to be using every second of that 25 minutes, okay? So I highly suggest, if you didn't time yourself for the original, I suggest going back and timing yourself when you do your rewrite and your revisions, okay? 25 minutes, get used to that time crunch. So this FRQ was a FRQ dealing with federalism. So that would have been our second unit from this year. So the prompt starts off by basically giving you the definition of federalism, which is super nice. Sometimes they will do that. Sometimes they won't, like you saw last week. But the United States Constitution establishes a federal system of government. Under federalism, policy making is shared between national and state governments. Over time, the powers of the national government have increased relative to those of the state government. Develop an argument about whether the expanded powers of the national government benefits or hinders policy making. Okay, and then as we've talked about, this part is no different. At least one of your pieces of evidence needs to come from the list that they provide for you. Okay, and we'll talk about what these founding documents are down below, but you needed to choose from the Articles of Confederation, Brutus I, or Federalist 10 for your first piece of evidence. Then your second piece of evidence needs or can be another foundational document that is not listed on here. It can be another foundational document that is on this list that you didn't use. So for example, if you used Articles of Confederation, you can use Federalist 10 for your second piece of evidence. You just can't use the Articles of Confederation twice. Okay. This could also be, your second piece of evidence could also be a court case or another concept from AP government. So it can be a little bit more broad than just like a document or a case, okay? And just like we've practiced, you do have to use reasoning to explain why your evidence supports your claim or thesis, right? This is probably the most difficult part of your writing, but this is the why, the meat of your argument. What's the point of bringing up your evidence? That's where you're explaining it here, okay? And you'll do that for each piece. So I want to talk about just a couple of things here. For this modified AP test, this is a 7-point question. that is a point more than it would be had this whole pandemic situation not happened. So this is a very crucial part of your AP test. This is 60% of your AP score, okay? 60%. So you need to make sure that you are working efficiently, not necessarily quickly, efficiently, and making sure that you are including everything that you need to include. Okay. Now, so one change that a couple of you asked me about when you guys were working on this actual assignment, you do not need to include a rebuttal or a refutation paragraph. So we had done in past exercises, right, at the very end, the other side of the argument says this, however, right, you do not need to do that. You absolutely do not and should not do that. It's not going to earn you any points, and it's going to take you way longer to complete the actual assignment. Okay, so keep that in mind. That is a big change for this this revision. Okay, so I want to walk through the rubric. I put a rubric on here for you guys, so that way you could take a screenshot or what have you. This is how you are going to be graded. And I think this is a good thing when you're doing your revision to make or pause this video and use as a checklist as you go through and rewrite this FRQ, okay? Because odds are you might have some revisions. Okay, so as I said, this FRQ is now out of 7 points. It's actually easier now to earn points. Okay, and I'll kind of explain why here as we go through. So I want you to think of this argumentative essay in 3 paragraphs. Your claim and thesis is going to be 1 paragraph, and that might just be a sentence, and that's okay. Your second paragraph is going to be what's in blue here. You need to include the document from the list provided, okay? Basically showing the reader that you understand the document and explaining how your document supports your claim, providing evidence, closing the loop, tying your argument together, okay? This third I don't know what that other 3 was, but the third paragraph, sorry guys, is gonna be your other piece of evidence, whether that's another document from the list or not from the list, a court case, or some other concept, okay? So 3 paragraphs. Now, just like the original argumentative essay, this has not changed, and this is the most crucial point. I will say that again. This is the most important point that you must earn, and that is your thesis, okay? For this, you need to establish a defensible argument that is related to the prompt, and there are 2 parts to this. You have to answer the question, and you have to establish a line of reasoning. Okay, so you have to say, and we'll look at this, national or the expanded national powers benefits / hinders policymaking because XYZ or X and Y. Okay, that because ... establishes your line of reasoning, and I want you to write it that way. The readers are going to be looking for that because in your claim. If you leave it as expanded powers of national government benefits policymaking, period, you do not get that point, okay? And if you see here, you have to earn this point in order to earn 1, 2, 3, 4 of the other points available to you, okay? So if you do not get your claim, you cannot earn the point for the document, like the evidence you provide. You cannot earn the reasoning point. Even if it's bomb and it's killer, you do not get that point if you do not get your claim. Same thing with your second piece of evidence. If you rock your second piece of evidence, but you did not cite or give your claim or cite a line of reasoning, you don't get those points. Okay, so you absolutely have to get that claim point in order to get as many points as possible. Okay, now, before I go through the rest of this, if you don't earn the claim point. You can still earn 2 other points. That's actually a change. They've made it a little bit easier. You can earn a point, as you see here, for selecting a document that relates to your claim, okay? So basically that's like a gimme point, right? If you talk about one of the documents that they listed in the prompt, so these 3 that were up here, you can still earn a point. You can earn a second point by talking about a second piece of evidence that you provide that relates to your prompt and claim. Those would be the only 2 points you could receive, okay? So I really want you guys to get your claim, make it clear, keep it by itself even, bold it if you're typing it, underline it if you're handwriting it. But the first thing you need to do is answer the question and establish a line of reasoning, okay? You will get a point, as I said, for selecting a document that they provide for you that relates to your claim. You will get a third point if you show that you understand the document. So you're going to need to talk about what the document is about. And then you will get that fourth point here if you basically give reasoning. Explain why your first document supports your claim. Connect the document to your claim by providing examples, evidence, and closing the loop, like we talked about in the last video. Okay. Then there are 3 more points up for grabs. So again, you'll get a point if you provide a second piece of evidence that relates to your prompt and claim. And then you will get a second point for that paragraph if you show the reader that you understand the evidence that you gave. And then the third point, making it a total of 7, comes from, again, explaining, expanding, elaborating, providing details and evidence to prove that your evidence supports your claim. Okay, again, be as explicit as possible, close the loop at the end of the paragraph. Okay, so like I said, I know that this is a little bit hard to wrap your brain around. Feel free to pause the video here, write down any questions you have about the grading rubric, and then I will insert a little piece at the end. If you have any questions, you want to write those down here. Or at that point, you can ask me about the grading. Okay, so at this point now, let's go ahead and do a walkthrough. So like we read in the very beginning of this video, over time, right, it's talking about federalism. Over time, the national government's powers has increased compared to those of the state governments. Okay, your job is to develop an argument about whether these expanded powers of the national government benefits or hinders policymaking. This is where your claim comes from. Okay, so the first thing that you need to do when you get your prompt, whenever the prompt is on May 11th, is you need to decide what your options are for arguing. Okay, now that does not mean that you should start writing immediately. Please do not start typing away, because if you start doing that, it is going to be a hot mess of an essay, okay? You need to get your thoughts down. You need to figure out what you're going to argue. I'm not talking about intense outlining, but you should at least jot down some ideas off to the side, whether that's in the text box where you're typing on a separate sheet of paper, something like that, to get your thoughts organized. Okay, you need to figure out, as I just said, what the 2 possibilities are that you can argue. So for this particular prompt, you can do one of 2 things. You can say that the expanded powers of the national government benefits policymaking, or you can say the expanded powers of the national government hinders policymaking. Now remember, you're not done. That's not your claim. You would not get the point for this. You're going to have to then list your because, okay? But I just wanted to get you guys thinking about, okay, what do I have to argue? Here is a word of advice, okay? When you look at the prompt and you look at the documents that are given to you, it should be pretty clear that there is a side that is easier to argue than another. My word of advice is argue for what is easier for you to argue rather than what you necessarily agree with, right? So if you're gung-ho that expanded powers of the national government hinders policymaking, but as you'll see, I think it might be easier to argue that it benefits policymaking, go with what's easier, okay? Because otherwise you're going to be sitting there racking your brain. You might not finish. You might not get the points, okay? So that just a word of advice. Once you figure out what the two possibilities are that you can argue, then I would take a look at the foundational documents that you have to use for that first piece of evidence, and figure out ultimately where they fit on each side of the argument. Now, remember, this is an open note test. Open note, right? However, that does not mean that you're going to have the time to Google, figure out the argument, you need to know pretty quickly what these documents are, their main ideas, okay? This is why outlining is so important, because based on the document that you choose and the evidence that you choose, that's where your line of reasoning is going to come from for your claim, okay? So this is why outlining is important. You can understand what the documents are that you're supposed to be using, but it's also why you need to know your documents inside and out. Okay, that's why we are going to be completing a matching activity that my hope is on test day you can kind of have open in another tab or on your phone, or you can print out, so that way you have it in front of you kind of as a cheat sheet. Okay, so let's go ahead and break down the three documents that they've given us. So the first is the Articles of Confederation, all the way back to August. Remember, we did our tombstone activity. So ultimately, remember, these Articles of Confederation are the first governing document of our country, right? They're kind of that extreme reaction to the monarchy, giving all of the power to the states, creating a very weak national government, okay? Because of this, it was very ineffective. There was no uniform policy making when the states were independent. Right? The national government couldn't collect taxes. It couldn't create a standing army. There were no courts, no executive branch. It was very weak. This, I would say, is a pretty strong argument or a piece of evidence that you can use for how expanded powers of the national government benefits policymaking, right? Because look, we tried states having power before. That sucked. That didn't work. So now we need to have expanded policy or national powers in order to help policymaking. Okay. I'm going to go down to Fed 10 because this also deals with expanding powers, makes it beneficial makes policymaking beneficial. Because I think, as I said earlier or alluded to, this is probably the easier side to argue, simply because you are giving, or they have given you, two documents that lean toward that side. Okay, so let's talk about Fed 10. Remember, Fed 10 talks about factions. Remember, factions, if you write it in capitals, there's like the I and the O, 10. Okay, that might be a way to help you remember. But ultimately, remember, this argument is saying, or this text is saying, that factions are bad, but they can't be gotten rid of. Okay, but we need a large republic, a very large government with many factions, because that will prevent tyranny of the majority and the majority opinion from dominating the rest of society, right? When we have a large republic, the more opinions you have, the more beneficial it will be, right? This ultimately is a hallmark of pluralist democracy, right? If you use this document, you could even throw that in there just to, even show the reader that you know your stuff, okay? Ultimately, when we're looking at this, right, Madison was saying that having many factions encourages groups to compete in policymaking. That acts as a check on the system itself, right? This representative democracy that we have, ultimately, when groups are competing for policy, allows policy to be created for the common good, rather than one specific faction and their interests, right? These representatives can filter through the goals of the factions Not only can ideas be looked over by the representatives, these qualified people that we have elected into office, but it also minimizes the chance that one majority group gets a stronghold on politics, right? And this ultimately creates policy in the long run for the public good rather than for selfish reasons of factions, okay? That's a little bit more complex than Articles of Confederation, but hopefully you can see how that argument leans toward expanded powers benefits policymaking. Okay. Now let's go back to Brutus. Brutus is the document that you would use if you were going to argue that expanded powers of the national government hinders policymaking. I don't think that this is necessarily the easiest argument to make, but you absolutely can. Okay, if you feel confident with Brutus 1, go for it. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to be going that it benefits policymaking. So if you have specific questions on hindering policymaking, let me know. I'm just going to assume, and maybe that is not right of me, but we'll see, that most of you are going to go the benefits route. Okay, so for those of you that may have chosen Brutus 1, remember, this is an anti-federalist document that is going to be kind of wary of this new constitution and wary of creating a large national republic. Ultimately going to be saying that this large republic is very dangerous. These clauses like the supremacy clause, the necessary and proper clause are going to inflate our national government to the point where it might devolve into tyranny. Right? The necessary and proper clause might allow the government to justify any action, and that action might infringe on the rights of people. The supremacy clause would give the national government too much power, right? You could probably talk about how this would prevent effective policymaking because national policy doesn't account for regional differences, right? Brutus 1 talks about how too large of a republic it makes it too difficult to govern efficiently for the will of the people, protecting the rights and liberties of the people. Right, there are differences between states that cannot be addressed at the national level. Right, so like you could use an example of, let's say that the national government with its expanded powers wants to enact an environmental policy. Okay, right, that sounds great. That's what most people would want. However, that does not take into account states with large oil and coal industries, right, which would be harmful to their economy, right? So you can kind of see how that might be a negative when it comes to policymaking that you could kind of spin for your argument. Okay. Like I said, if you have any questions about Brutus 1 or that hindering side of the argument, let me know. But as I said, I think most of you are probably going to lean toward the benefit side of this argument. Okay, so first things first, do a little bit of outlining, right? Do you see why it's important to know these documents? You don't want the first time that you are outlining and seeing the prompt to have to then go back and research these documents. You will never finish, okay? So outline, figure out what side is probably easiest to argue, what documents you can use and why. Okay, and then start thinking about, okay, how can I provide another piece of evidence? Is there a court case that jumps to my mind right away? Is there a term that jumps to my mind? Okay, then you will start writing. Okay, your first paragraph is going to be your claim. You cannot earn 4 points on this FRQ, as I said earlier, if you do not earn this point. You have to earn this point, okay? You must respond to the question and you must develop a line of reasoning, okay? This is going to be a standalone paragraph. So even if your claim is one sentence, that's going to be your paragraph, okay? You do not need an introduction. And one other thing to note, something that grinds my gears and is not a proper way of writing, is you should not use pronouns. Avoid pronouns as much as possible. Please, please, please do not start your paragraph with "I believe that." That drives me absolutely insane. And your readers, quite frankly, don't care. Okay? You need to get straight to the point. My husband is laughing at me because I was very serious about that, but I'm deadly serious. Do not start with "I believe." Okay? Now, I have a couple of examples here when it comes to claim and then line of reasoning. So remember, your claim must answer that question. Your line of reasoning should be the points that you are going to argue and then support with your evidence. So think of your line of reasoning kind of as a summary of what's to come in your essay. That's why it's so important to outline, right? You need to know, all right, here are the documents, here are my pieces of evidence. Ultimately, what are these pieces of evidence trying to prove? Okay, so for example, this is predominantly the one that I'm going to be using, but the expanded powers of the national government benefits policymaking. That answers the question. Now, I say because it has made policymaking more efficient, and if states had more power, it would be dangerous. This, because, and the two things that follow are your line of reasoning. This is what you need to earn that point for your claim. Okay. Another piece of evidence that was from the 2019 exam, this is a student example that actually received the point. The expanding powers of the national government benefits policymaking because, and they even capitalized because, it prevents delays, such as states making conflicting laws, and prevents states from violating federal and civil rights laws. Okay, so again, because they have that line of reasoning, they've kind of previewed their argument. That is going to earn them the point. Okay. Now, your second paragraph, once you have listed your claim and line of reasoning, is to provide your first piece of evidence. And this is going to be from the document list that they've provided. So for us, articles, Brutus 1, Fed 10. Okay. You need to, as we go up to this rubric, make it clear how it relates to your claim, introduce it right away, show the reader that you understand the document, provide a summary of the document, talk about its main points and how it relates to your claim. And then you need to get your English skills out and give reasoning as to why that document supports your claim, right? Why are you bringing it up in the first place? You must explicitly tie the document in here and again, close the loop. So one thing that I did want to note here, because as I was reading some samples, this came up quite a bit. It is very important to understand that you are not explaining why expanding national powers are good or bad. That is a different argument. You are arguing whether or not it benefits or hinders policymaking, right? So all of the words of the prompt are important, okay? I can tell right now that there will be a few of you that will talk about why expanding powers are bad or why they're good. That even if you have a beautiful essay, it will not earn you points because you did not answer the prompt. Okay, so you need to make sure that you understand exactly what the prompt is asking. Okay, so let's take a look at a sample paragraph that includes the first piece of evidence from the document list. So I went with the Articles of Confederation, okay? So I started off by saying the U.S. has already tried giving states more power than the national government, and it has proved to be ineffective and inefficient. What I just did there was I kind of connected it to my claim, right? I'm supposed to be talking about how this national government with its expanded powers makes policymaking more efficient, okay? Then I introduce my evidence. The Articles of Confederation are a prime example of why a strong national government is better for policymaking. I've listed the document, and it's one that's been provided, and I connected it to my claim by saying that it's an example of why a strong national government is better or benefits policymaking. Okay, that's my first point. My second point comes from showing the reader that I understand the document. So I'm going to talk about the main points of the articles, make it relevant to my claim. So I said with the articles, or under the articles, the federal government could do very little. It made the states more independent by allowing them to have their own currency and impose their own taxes. However, the Articles of Confederation made it harder to pass laws because each state had very different agendas and it required over a majority of them to agree. So I explained what the system was like under the Articles of Confederation, showing the reader that I understand the document. That's my second point. My third point then comes from connecting it back to my claim, giving reasoning, saying, why did I bring this up for talking about benefiting policymaking? So I said, to amend, it required a unanimous decision. This makes it nearly impossible to add a new amendment to change policy, right? I could probably even be more specific here and talk about how, when states had this much power and when, a unanimous decision among states was required, it made it nearly impossible to add an amendment and to create policy or change policy, right? Again, reflecting back on, okay, Articles of Confederation, states had all the power, national government was weak, that didn't work. So here's why. Here's why we need a national government with more power. Okay. Another example comes from this. And one thing that I want to stress, I wish that there was a blanket answer. I wish that there was a rubric like the concept application where there was arguably one right answer. There isn't. You're going to have a lot of different answers to this prompt than your peers. Okay. That is why it is so important that you articulate clearly and that you have all of the components of your essay, because your essay is going to be different from every other person that writes this. It should be. You should not be copying. Don't do that because they have software, guys, okay? So just keep that in mind. So here's another example, right? You could also talk about the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation like this. The Articles of Confederation are a prime example of why a strong national government is better for efficient policymaking. Boom, first sentence, identified the document, tied it back to the claim. Okay, one of the biggest weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation was the inability of the federal government to collect taxes. As a result, the federal government could not raise a standing army and was dependent on the states to provide troops. When Shays' Rebellion happened, the federal government was unable to put it down due to this weakness. That's my second point. That is a very clear articulation that I, as the writer, know what the Articles of Confederation did and why it was weak. Okay. Point 3 comes from this. This shows how a strong national government benefits policymaking because I think that's a good strategy to use, right? Restating your claim to kind of introduce your reasoning, I think will help you think through it maybe a little bit better. So this shows how a strong national government benefits policymaking because a weak federal government allowed for rebellions and chaos throughout the country and was unable to be stopped. Had the federal government been stronger under the Articles of Confederation, this could have been prevented via federal policy, right? So again, I closed the loop here, talking about policy making and how a strong federal government would benefit that, using the Articles of Confederation as an example. Okay? I know it's a lot, guys. I know it's a lot, but this is why we're going to continue to practice. Okay? So your third paragraph then is your second piece of evidence, and it is a different document from the list, another document from class, or a concept from the course. Okay? Again, you'll identify what you are going to be talking about right away. Make sure that you demonstrate you understand the concept to the reader by defining, explaining, elaborating, providing evidence. Then explain how it relates back to your claim and close the loop. Okay? So this route, I chose to go with the, going back to the claim up here. There it is. If states had more power, it would be dangerous. Tying in, states would be violating the civil rights of their people. Okay, so I started off by again kind of restating my claim, tying in my line of reasoning. Another benefit to the expanded powers of the federal government when it comes to policymaking is ensuring that civil rights and liberties are not infringed by the states. That very quickly identifies to the reader what I'm going to be talking about. Okay. Now, my first point comes from this. Throughout history, several states have implemented segregational policies against minorities without check. For example, during the period of Reconstruction following the Civil War, many Southern states implemented Jim Crow laws that established de jure or by law discrimination and segregation between the white majority and the African American minority. These policies extended into all realms of social life, including education and schooling. Again, starting to introduce my evidence. The second point comes from really showing that I know what I'm talking about, and I'm going to use Brown v. Board to do that. In the case of Brown v. Board of Education, the state's policy of separate but equal educational facilities was challenged. In this case, the Supreme Court ruled that this policy was unconstitutional, having violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. I just dropped in so many little pieces from the course that the reader is going to know that I know what I'm talking about, right? I talk about Jim Crow laws, de jure discrimination and segregation, Brown v. Board, separate but equal, Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, right? All of those things prove that you know what you're talking about, okay? Now, the third point, I need to show how this benefits policymaking by having expanded national government powers. This case demonstrates the benefit to expanded national powers when it comes to policymaking because without a Supreme Court to interpret the Constitution and check state governments, states would have continued to uphold the policy of segregation. Allowing states to operate without checks on their power would be detrimental to policymaking because states can violate the civil rights of citizens I have a typo. Sorry, guys. States can violate the civil rights of citizens as seen in the ruling of Brown v. Board of Education. Okay. Now, another example that I have down here was actually a student example, and it's very similar to the one above. This, the student chose to use the court case Shaw v. Reno. Okay, so they said another benefit to the expanded powers of the national government when it comes to policymaking is ensuring that civil rights and liberties are not infringed by the states. Throughout history, several states have implemented segregational policies against minorities without check. In the case Shaw v. Reno, the state of North Carolina had used gerrymandering to split voters up racially, with districts as thin as an interstate. That's probably the first point there. Okay, they're identifying their piece of evidence, what they're going to be using to support their claim. In this case, the Supreme Court ruled that this act by North Carolina was unconstitutional and had violated the 14th Amendment. I would say that's your second point, right? They talked about the significance of the ruling. This case demonstrates the benefit to expanded national powers when it comes to policymaking because without a Supreme Court to interpret the Constitution and check state governments, states like North Carolina would have been able to racially gerrymander indefinitely. Allowing states to operate without checks, kind of very similar to the example before, on their power would be detrimental for policymaking because states can violate the civil rights of citizens and have, as seen in the ruling of Shaw v. Reno. Okay? Again, connected it back to how their example demonstrates that expanding national powers benefits policymaking. Okay. I know that this is a lot to digest and compare to your own writing, but I really wanted to make sure that this was as in-depth as possible because, I mean, this is 60% of your AP test. So again, just like last week, I'm going to allow you guys to do revisions on your original essay. So I'm not going to be sending you an email with your original text because you guys have that in Google Classroom this week. Excuse me. So make sure to head back to the assignment from Friday, April 24th to access your original response and then complete revisions and upload them to the assignment for Monday, April 27th. Okay. Now, if you have questions on this revision, you need to utilize office hours. Email me, stop into Google Meet to work with me on these argumentative writing skills, okay? At the very end of this video, just like last week, I'm gonna ask you how you think you scored on your rubric out of 1 to 7, okay? And I will also have a space for you to ask questions if you have them regarding the argumentative essay, Okay, so make sure you fill that out for me. So make sure that you are completing your revisions on a Google Doc. Upload that Google Doc to the assignment for Monday, April 27th, and let me know if you guys have any questions, and I will talk to you guys soon. Thanks for sticking with me. See you guys later.